So there's the glass work. These things right here are air bubbles, and air bubbles are really bad in glass work. I might need to grind those spots out. Like this would have been ideal the whole way. Welcome back to All the Work, my restoration slash refurbishment slash awesomification of my 1987 Ski Supreme. Yeah, Bryce. Where the remote is? Nobody, I'm not sure. That's something you could probably look for. Oh, okay, good to know. Alright, let's go find it. As you can see, things are not going to plan. That was just an impromptu visit to the boat while Dylan was napping. Bryce was watching TV, and I saw air bubbles in the stringers, and that was actually me sending a text message to my buddy Mike. It really isn't a surprise that in my first fiberglassing attempt, I didn't do a great job, and that there were some air bubbles. And so I decided to do the right thing and grind out the air bubbles to the best of my ability, and then I'm going to add another layer of 1708 over those. And at this point I was just thinking about patching over where I ground out, and that's why I have multiple sections of 1708. Later I will move on to just doing a full laminate of the entire thing, but at this point I just still thought that I was going to be just doing a quick re-lamination, no big deal, get it done. I start the stringer re-repair by thickening up a batch of resin with the silica beads and then spatulaing it into those grooves where I ground out the air bubbles. I was still fairly nervous about mixing resins at this point, and the idea of making a thickened resin and finding the correct consistency and doing it quickly and getting it mixed up and usable was kind of freaking me out. I definitely was more nervous about working time than it needed to be. I've only reached a point where the resin has gone past its working time and turned into a jelly one time, and that ended up being not a big deal at all. So I am trying to work quickly and nervously, and I do feel like with every batch, however, I'm improving and I'm feeling much better about it. But these early pours were nerve-wracking, and as I'm mixing up new batches of resin while I'm doing a single laminate, I'm definitely freaking out. I'm kind of rushing through my trowel work, and I'm just not an expert yet, but I'm getting it done. I'm getting glass on the stringers and trying to stiffen up the boat and just trying to make this thing as stiff and safe as possible. Here is where I make the decision to 1708 the rest of the stringer. Let's get another piece there. I do have an overlap, which is going to come or be an issue later. However, at the time I didn't really know what I was doing, so it was an issue.
I ground them out, and now I'm doubling it up. Overbuild the shit out of it.
That is the follow-up text that I sent to Mike later in the day. This is where I've just decided to put a lot of 1708 in the stringer, make it stronger, make it better, and move forward. I should mention that my in-laws are in town, and the reason that I'm working out in the daylight right now is because this is Friday afternoon. My in-laws came to town, boom, they're taking the kids over to the pool, and I am getting good quality boat work time. That's kind of the deal. They're coming up, and I'm going to get extended hours of boat work. So that's why really this video is just going to be 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, of me going ham while the in-laws are in town to take care of the kids. Now I am cleaning up some of the loose ends on the first stringer. I fiberglassed the 1708 not into perfect overlap up at the tip of that, so I just used the oscillating saw to cut off some extra 1708 that was hanging off and make it clean up and look nice. That is the end of fiberglassing the first stringer. I have completed one repair of this boat, and then we moved from the day into the evening. Now I'm at night, and now I'm diving straight into tearing up the foam out of the second stringer. Now I am using a new technique on this one. I had an epiphany while I was doing, I think, fiberglassing the first stringer. I realized that if I cut holes with a 2-inch hole saw and separated those by about 6 inches and then cut them between those with a sawzall, that I'd have a good access point and the rounded holes would be a little stiffer, take care of the stringers a little bit more, and then I could space those holes out about 9 inches apart and then just take more time in digging the foam out coming in from each end. So I'll end up with a stringer that's got a series of holes down it versus a series of giant square cutouts. And I think this is going to be a much more structurally sound method, and it ends up working great. I do find some interesting things, like some voids where there was no foam. Again, I found areas in specific up near the engine mount on this stringer where there was just no foam in there to begin with, which is scary. And there was also some weak spots in the fiberglass stringer itself, and so some of the holes just kind of made themselves because they were over a weak spot or because they were under where there was no foam. But I was able to get the foam out of the stringer without taking nearly as much surface area off the top of it, and really just one night worth of work is one night worth of work, whether it's an hour or in this case an hour and a half to 2 hours of digging the foam out. So I do think I'm going to be able to use this technique really slyly over on the passenger side, but we'll get there later. But basically, the passenger side, I'm going to get the foam out with a Swiss cheese hole design that my buddy Emmett is going to give me some engineering advice on. So you can see I've just moved through the stringer. It definitely took a little longer than last time, but I'm making good steady progress using my crowbar, sometimes using a little crowbar. The foam is still soaking wet. It's still really cramped and tedious work, but this is kind of some good feelings here where I'm moving through and making progress, and I know that I'm doing the right thing, or at least I'm doing something smart, or it's better than last time anyway. My neighbor Luke, you can see him on the right there. He just showed up. He's drinking beer while I'm finishing working. It's always fun to have Luke come over because I can talk about my ideas, and he asks questions, and I realize that I'm doing it wrong, and it's just fun to have a project like this and have someone like that to rap with. Bag of wet foam here at the end of the video, and he estimates that it weighed about 33 pounds. So that's 33 pounds from one stringer of weight that's coming out of the boat. Pretty solid. Saturday morning, I have a stringer that's been completely cleared of foam. Now I need to start the process of reattaching that stringer to the floor of the boat. One thing I talked to Luke about last night was how there's big areas where that stringer is not held to the floor of the boat well. Basically, those two stringers are a single piece of fiberglass that was set into the boat and then glued down. Now, where the water was coming into the boat, which turns out, we'll find out later, is actually from the front of the engine mount up there. The water was coming in there, and it looks like it got to the glue over time. And where I'm sitting right there, under the stringer towards the center of the boat, is not attached to the floor. It's just floating. There I am with the flashlight that Luke had stolen from before. I got it back. He gave it back. Looking up in the nose, kind of just checking things out and learning. But getting back to the stringer and not being held to the floor, where I'm cleaning with acetone right there, that stringer right there is floating. Now that doesn't sound like a super structurally sound boat to me. So I am going to mix up some peanut butter resins and paste it in there. You can't see a close up here, but there's big gobs of glue down in there, and it's bumpy, and it's not a very easy place to fiberglass. So I'm gonna have to mix up this peanut butter resin, go in there, paste it in. That way I have smooth edges to bevel the actual 1708 over. This is one of those small moments in the boat build that makes all the difference. You see I'm leaning over the boat there, and I just cut up a old silicone caulk tube into a little chute basically. And I'm not using it yet right here, but that chute's gonna come in handy because I'm gonna be able to use that to pour resin in between the stringer and the engine mount. That little chute is gonna allow me access to pour resin into that. And what I'm trying to do is seal all the way around this stringer. When I pour the foam, I want the foam just to go straight up the stringer, be waterproof from the rest of it, so if water does start getting in again, there'll be a barrier between the stringers, and I'll maintain more structural integrity. I think I'm getting ready here. I'm mixing up my resin to use my first pour with that little chute. You can see it sitting on top of the floor there. It just moved in between the stringers. I did add a little bit of milled fibers to this resin so it'll have a little more structural integrity. Here I am using the chute. I'm pouring into the chute, moving slowly, just making it like a little lake bed of resin down in there. Now I'm checking my work and finding the real issue. So I'd always felt like my boat was breaking when I would hit big waves back in New Hampshire. And turns out it was. That crack right there is up under the engine mounts, and probably the source of all the water that soaked all that foam. Now there's a hole that somebody drilled looking for the issue. When I left this boat back in New Hampshire at my brother's house, he took it somewhere and some guy told him that the stringers were broken. Well, turns out there are no stringers in it, so that guy was kind of full of shit. But also, my brother was real wishy-washy on what the guy said and what was wrong with it, and I just wasn't buying it. I think he was just trying to get it off his property, so kind of ignored it. But I knew that somebody had said there was an issue. That right there, I believe, is what the guy was talking about, and what I did not get a clear explanation from my brother of what the issue was. Would that have made the difference? I have no idea. I think I still would have ended up with this thing in Utah. And at the end of the day, I'm not too worried about it. I found that crack, kind of under my breath, said, oh my God. But then, based on how well fiberglass has been going, was totally confident and ready to make the repair. Now we're into Sunday and it's more of the same. The goal is still just to brace up that stringer to the floor. I did all that peanut butter work yesterday, laid a little bit of fiberglass, but now I'm just gonna try and finish that out. I made it through my first gallon of resin at this point, and I am also still trying to sell my truck, so there's gonna be a lot of text messaging, usually at the worst time, right after I mix up some resin. Then I get a text message when time is of the essence. Super annoying. Almost as annoying as my kid banging a plastic cup next to me while I'm trying to record on a video. Now I am pouring resin inside of the stringer itself. I'm using my little chute again. This is going to seal up the inside of that stringer and not allow water to go from that inner void to the stringer. I will have foam in there. I'll have foam everywhere, but I'm just trying to mitigate any water issues as we go. Now we're back to 40 times speed. I am hustling through. I am pouring more resin into the stringer, sealing it up from the inside. Here I go, mixing up more peanut butter. Yeah, I got that little bag of silica. You can see when I shake that, I'm making peanut butter. I'm actually going up underneath the nose of the stringer. There's a huge gap way up in there. So the whole front of it, basically from that right side, the shorter stringer, up to the front of the left stringer, is totally not sealed to the floor. So I got up in there, laid some peanut butter under where the gap is. I will 1708 over that later. In the back, there was also some major ridging issues, so that got a little extra peanut butter. If it sounds like my voice is changing pitches and tones as we move through the video, it's because I'm voicing over all this kind of at random times. I try and hit up nap times, sometimes right around breakfast when kids are quiet, and my kid just fell off the couch and it looks like he's okay. The whole time I'm doing this repair work, my thought is that the more I can stiffen up and structurally solidify the boat, the better it's going to be in the long run, because I've got the floor that needs to be put back down. And if every little piece is as firm and strong as it can possibly be, then I don't need to rely on the big pieces. So because I cut that floor out and didn't keep it connected between the wall of the boat and the engine mount like Ron Tana suggested, I am trying to do every little tiny thing I can do to make sure when that floor does go back in, that the boat is not completely reliant on that floor in that section, but that all the little pieces kind of come together and make one super solid, super strong, super awesome boat. More truck sale texting. Now I'm past the peanut butter phase and I am actually laying in the 1708, getting this sealed up. I don't know if this is actually going to add the structural integrity I'm looking for, but it makes me feel good inside that I'm doing it. And if I didn't do this right now, I would be kicking myself forever. I'm using a little different technique there where I actually wetted out the 1708 first and then laid it in. That was something I saw Andy from Boatworks Today do. I'm up there with my flashlight looking in at it, and that was the end of the day project. One funny thing to note there was when I cleaned up, the flashlight was all covered in resin and fiberglass, and I got acetone on the lens of the flashlight, and now it's all foggy and gross. I decided to slow a section of video down where I'm mixing up a batch of resin. That is the MEK methyl ethyl ketone that I'm pouring into the polyester resin and stirring up, and now we're back to 40 times speed. I wanted you to just see the process I was going through there. I realized I've been rushing through that quite a bit. So I mix up a batch of resin and just finish off shoring up this stringer for the night. My goal is to get all of this extra work done. That way tomorrow I can pour foam into the stringer and start moving on. I've really learned patience with laminating both the fiberglass and making the peanut butter. I am really getting a feel for my working times. I got quite a bit more time than I thought I had before, and I'm just confident that I can mix it up, do the work, and do it slowly and deliberately and do a good job. So it feels a lot better to be working like that and having that confidence. So this is the last of it to get these stringers held to the ground for now. I think I do end up doing a little bit more later. But for the weekend, it's winding to an end. Clean up the tools, stare at the boat a little bit more, and figure out tomorrow's plan.